Imagine spending, like, the first 4 decades of your life constructing this incredibly elaborate house. You pour the foundation, you follow the blueprint society handed you to the letter, you frame the walls, and you polish the floors.
Right, and everyone walks by and just praises the architecture.
Exactly. From the outside, it's the absolute picture of success. But then, right around the time you finish the roof, you step inside and, well, you realize you don't actually want to live there.
Yeah. The structure is flawless, but it feels entirely empty.
Right. And up until that exact moment, you assumed the building process was, the entire point of existence. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a really fascinating stack of research, from foundational Jungian psychology to modern financial and life philosophy.
To basically decode why the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung looked at that meticulously built house and declared that life really begins at 40, and that up until then, you were merely doing research.
Which is such a wild thing to say, right? I mean, it's a complete paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Because we're so conditioned to view midlife as the beginning of a decline.
We really are, but the framework we're exploring today completely upends that. It frames midlife not as a crisis to be managed, but as a mandatory system upgrade.
A system upgrade. I love that.
Yeah, it's the psychological transition from building a social mask to actually discovering who you are beneath it.
And the beauty of this is that it's universally relevant to you, the listener, whether you're, approaching your 40s, deep in the middle of them, or looking back. Understanding the mechanics of this shift kind of changes how you view every decision you've ever made.
It really does reframe everything.
So let's look at the baseline first.
Yeah.
To understand why we need a system upgrade at 40, we have to look at the original operating system, which Jung called the program of life's morning.
Right. And the morning program is fiercely rigid. And, well, for good reason. Jung argued that the first half of life is strictly defined by expansion.
Expansion in what way?
It's an outward-facing psychological imperative. Think about what's required of you biologically and socially in your 20s and 30s.
Oh, sure. You have to break away from your parents, cultivate self-reliance.
Exactly. Find a mate. Establish a firm footing in the social hierarchy. It's all outward.
Right. It's about acquiring the basics of survival and status. You're basically downloading the base software needed to function in society. You're installing programs for networking, for ambition, for conformity.
Yeah, and Jung talks heavily about the need to build a persona during this time.
The persona.
Yes, the persona, which, the word originally referred to the masks worn by actors in ancient Greek theater.
Oh, well, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we build, a social mask. We polish it, we refine it, and we design it explicitly to gain societal approval. It sort of reduces the friction between our inner chaotic selves and the rigid demands of society.
But I think the crucial thing to understand here is that the persona isn't inherently a bad thing, right? Like, it's highly functional.
Oh, absolutely. It's necessary.
Because you can't walk into a corporate boardroom or, a parent-teacher conference acting entirely on your raw, unfiltered impulses. You need the mask to navigate responsibility.
Oh, right.
The problem is that the mask is a generic template. It's not the unique user.
Exactly. We trade authenticity for security and acceptance. And while this extroverted, outward expanding phase works wonderfully for society's stability, it creates tremendous collateral damage for certain types of people.
Ah, right. This is where Jacobi's work comes in.
Yes. Jacobi was a prominent analytical psychologist and a colleague of Jung's, and she pointed out a really fascinating dynamic here regarding introverts.
Because the morning program heavily favors extroverts, right? Like the people who naturally want to go out and conquer the external world.
Precisely. The morning of life rewards aggressive expansion. Networking, self-promotion, acquiring visible status symbols.
Yeah.
Because of this, Jacobi noted that quiet, reflective, naturally introverted people often feel like outright failures during their youth.
Man, that's brutal.
It is. They watch the glittering promises of early adulthood sort of slip past them, purely because their natural disposition just isn't suited for the heavy extroversion that the morning program demands.
So they're essentially running the wrong hardware for the morning software. Because society's overarching ethos prior to midlife simply doesn't reward inward reflection. It only rewards output.
Right, and that creates a quiet tragedy. Introverts spend their 20s and 30s feeling defective, trying to force themselves to care about a game they aren't equipped to play.
Yeah.
They are essentially living the first half of their life under the sign of the second half.
Wow. But Okay, here's the fascinating mechanical question for me. Let's look at the extroverts, or at least the people who successfully build that glittering persona.
Yeah.
They get the promotion, they get the house, they win the morning game.
Mm-hmm.
Why does that highly functional operating system inevitably crash? Because Jung observed this universal pattern, right? Right around the ages of 35 to 45, that perfect social mask just shatters. The external achievements suddenly feel completely hollow.
Well, it really comes down to psychological energy. Keeping the mask in place requires immense effort.
It's exhausting.
Exactly. Every time you prioritize the persona, you take a piece of your true self, a passion, an unconventional opinion, maybe a quirky trait, and you lock it in the psychological basement.
Right.
Jung believed that the ego-driven self simply reaches its functional limit in midlife. The social goals are attained, but only through a severe diminution of the personality.
So it's literally an energy crisis. You spend 20 years aggressively holding the basement door shut so you can look perfect upstairs, and eventually your psychological reserves just, run out. The dam breaks.
That's a perfect way to visualize it. You realize that you've discovered the rules for success in society, but those rules don't apply to your own soul. The truths and ideals that motivated your 20s are suddenly insufficient fuel for your 40s.
Wait, I have to challenge this a bit. Because if this structural glitch is so universal, if the morning program is clearly making people miserable at 40, why is the default human reaction the exact opposite of fixing it?
What do you mean?
Well, the universal cliche is like, the guy who buys a red Ferrari gets hair plugs and starts dating a 25-year-old. Or the executive who decides the cure for her burnout is to aggressively chase an even higher C-suite title. If the software is broken, why are they buying premium upgrades for it instead of uninstalling it?
Because they are misdiagnosing the emptiness. Psychologist Elliot Jacques studied this phenomenon deeply. He actually coined the term midlife crisis.
Oh, he's the one who coined it.
Yes, and he described it as a frantic race against time. When that internal emptiness hits, it feels like death approaching. So people resort to hypochondria, obsessive fitness routines, or sexual promiscuity simply to prove their vitality.
Wow. So they're terrified of their biological clock running out.
Exactly.
They're trying to treat a psychological crisis with biological and material band-aids.
Precisely. And the philosopher Bernardo Kastrup offers a brilliant cultural explanation for why we do this. He argues that Western society is heavily over-specialized in the ethos of the first half of life.
Meaning we only care about youth.
Right. Our culture champions productivity, material accumulation, and extroverted dominance above all else. We literally do not have a mainstream cultural template for the second half of life.
We don't have an afternoon operating system available for download.
We really don't. So when the internal game inherently changes at midlife, we lack the cultural tools to adapt. We don't know what else to do, so we just frantically consume more, achieve more, and pretend we are still 25.
We apply the rules of the morning to the afternoon, which results in that anachronistic, often desperate behavior you just described.
Exactly.
Which makes Carl Jung's personal experience with this exact crash so illuminating. Like, he didn't just write about this theory from some detached academic tower. He lives the crash.
He really did.
In his late 30s, Jung was at the absolute pinnacle of his morning program. He was Sigmund Freud's closest confidant. He was the heir apparent to the entire psychoanalytic movement. He had won the game. But then an ideological split happened between them. The relationship shattered. And despite all his societal prestige, Jung plunged into a profound, multi-year psychological crisis.
And look at how he responded. He didn't do what the culture dictates. He didn't seek out a younger, more prestigious mentor. He didn't try to conquer a new academic institution to prove his worth. He stopped expanding outward.
He withdrew.
Completely. He turned his focus entirely inward. He spent years exploring his own subconscious, analyzing his dreams, and confronting the aspects of himself he had locked in that basement.
Right.
This period of intense introversion resulted in him writing his famous Red Book. Through the total collapse of his professional persona, he discovered the blueprint for the second half of life. He proved that the midlife breakdown isn't a failure, it's the necessary catalyst for the upgrade.
So how do the rest of us actually execute that upgrade? If doubling down on our youth is a trap, what's the actual mechanism for resolving this crash?
Well, Jung calls this phase the afternoon of life, and he says it requires a fundamental inversion of our values.
Okay, an inversion. So we have to shift from extroversion to introversion.
Yes, from ambition to wisdom, and from proving ourselves to understanding ourselves. The psychological term he used for this is individuation.
Individuation.
Individuation is, quite literally, the process of becoming an individual. It's the arduous task of shedding the persona and integrating all those basement-dwelling parts of your psyche into a complete, authentic self.
Right.
Jung articulated it perfectly. He said, "What youth found and must find outside, the man of life's afternoon must find within himself." Because the external metrics of power and career advancement are simply no longer capable of providing meaning.
If I can try to explain individuation simply, it basically means stopping the performance.
Right.
It's the moment you stop walking into a room and asking, how do I need to act for these people to respect me? And you start asking, who am I when no one is watching, and what do I actually care about?
That's the essence of it, yes.
Yeah.
It's moving from a psychology of expectation to a psychology of authenticity.
I think of it as shifting from a strategy of conquest to a strategy of cultivation.
Oh, that's a great way to frame it.
Yeah, like in your 20s and 30s, you're a conqueror. You're acquiring territory, securing resources, planting your flag in the corporate or social world. But at 40, you have to transition into a cultivator. You have to stop acquiring land and start tending to the inner garden. You're trading the map that society handed you for a compass that you have to build from scratch.
That distinction between conquest and cultivation is exactly what we see historically, too. When you look at visionaries and historical figures, there's a really clear pattern of profound work emerging only after they abandoned the mourning program.
Really? Like who?
Well, Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa at 51. Socrates didn't begin his legendary philosophical teachings until he was well into his 40s. Viktor Frankl, after surviving the Holocaust, wrote Man's Search for Meaning post-40.
Wow. So they bloomed late because they stopped trying to conquer.
Yes, they stopped playing the extroverted game of status and shifted their entire focus to deep internal meaning. They stripped away the unnecessary noise.
But let's bring this down to earth for the listener for a second. Because it's easy for Jung to sit by a lake in Switzerland and talk about cultivating the inner garden, or to point at Da Vinci. But if you're a normal person with a mortgage, car payments, and teenagers, how do you actually shed your persona without destroying the life you've built? Like, how do you practice individuation on a Tuesday?
It's a great question. And it doesn't mean braining your life down or quitting your job. The mechanism for everyday individuation is what Jungian psychologists Robert Johnson and Jerry Rule call living your unlived life.
The unlived life, the stuff we left in the basement.
Exactly. It encompasses all the essential aspects of your personality that you actively suppressed in order to build your socially acceptable persona. Johnson and Rule describe it as listening to the distant drumbeat of the woulda, coulda, shoulda in the back of your mind.
Okay, so for the listener, this might be that childhood passion for sketching that you abandoned at 22 because it didn't pay the bills. Jung is saying that's not just a discarded hobby. That's a fractured piece of your identity that is actively trying to get your attention.
Yes. Or it's the desire for quiet, solitary nature walks that you sacrificed because your corporate culture demands constant weekend networking.
Right.
Actively engaging with that unlived, life-giving it time and space in your current reality is how you actualize those dormant potentials. You integrate them into your daily routine.
And the fascinating thing is that your subconscious will actually give you the roadmap if you pay attention. You know, you might develop a sudden fascination with a historical era, or start having recurring dreams, or feel an inexplicable urge to learn an instrument you've never touched.
Yeah, you have to treat those signals not as midlife eccentricities, but as vital clues.
Right. And alongside the unlived life, there's a second major requirement for the afternoon, right? The active pursuit of wisdom.
There's a brilliant quote from the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus that captures this perfectly. He said, "Men who love wisdom must be good inquirers into many things. In the second half of life, you must seek wisdom with the exact same ferocity that you sought wealth and status in the first half."
But why is wisdom so structurally important to this phase?
Because it serves a vital archetypal function in human society. Jung lamented that in modern Western culture, older adults constantly try to compete with the young. They try to look younger, act younger, out-hustle the 20-somethings.
Yeah, the Ferrari and the hair plugs again.
Exactly. But historically, in tribal and traditional structures, the elders weren't competitors. They were the guardians of mysteries, laws, and knowledge. By consciously cultivating wisdom, you transition into the meaningful role of guide and mentor. You step out of the frantic arena of competition.
You stop being their insecure rival and start being their compass.
Yeah.
Love that. Which brings us to the ultimate boundary. If this profound internal shift alters our perspective on success, identity, and the passage of time. How does it alter our perspective on the absolute end of the timeline? Like, how does individuation change our relationship with death?
This is perhaps Jung's most challenging and countercultural paradigm shift. Jung argued adamantly that as we move into the afternoon of life, we must view death not as a meaningless tragedy to be fought, but as life's ultimate goal.
Okay, calling death a goal sounds incredibly morbid. I mean, to a modern medically advanced society, that borders on nihilism.
It does sound jarring to us. We live in an era largely devoid of unifying religious myths, which means people naturally develop extreme health anxieties and neuroses. We view death purely as a terrifying annihilation.
Right.
But Jung stated, shrinking away from it is something unhealthy and abnormal, which robs the second half of life of its purpose.
But what's the psychological mechanism there? How does viewing the end as a goal make the present healthier?
Well, think about the structure of a narrative. A story only has meaning because it has an ending. If a movie just looped endlessly, the actions of the characters would eventually become completely meaningless.
That makes sense.
Jung recognized death as a profound mystery. And because he was deeply interested in the limits of consciousness, he remained open to the notion of some continuation of the psyche. He actively advised his patients, especially the elderly, to adopt an open-minded belief in some form of continuation.
Not necessarily a specific religious dogma, but just, the openness to a horizon.
Exactly. Because psychologically, a life directed toward an aim is richer and vastly healthier than a life that is aimless. If you view death as a goal, you move forward with the stream of time, you retain a sense of forward momentum.
Right.
But if you view it merely as an absolute end to be avoided at all costs, you exhaust all your energy swimming backwards against the current, desperately trying to remain 25 until you die.
It's the difference between gracefully conducting the final movement of a symphony and desperately trying to loop the opening chorus forever until the instruments break.
Precisely. Fighting the inevitable robs the afternoon of its unique beauty and purpose.
So let's distill the core of what we've explored today. Up until the age of 40, your life is heavily dictated by persona building. You are engaged in extroverted expansion, acquiring the necessary social and material tools to survive.
Yes.
That is the morning program, and it is necessary. But the inevitable emptiness that hits in midlife, the crashing of that operating system, is not a sign of failure. And it is certainly not a signal to double down on your youth. It is a mandatory psychological transition.
The afternoon of life demands individuation.
Right. It demands the conscious dismantling of the mask, the integration of your unlived life, and the pursuit of internal wisdom.
And as we unpack these concepts, it's worth reflecting on the quiet miracle of the digital age that allows us to have this conversation. The fact that these complex, century-old psychological frameworks are instantly accessible allows curious minds across the globe to engage with this material simultaneously.
It really is amazing.
It proves that the desire for self-actualization isn't just a Western luxury. It's a deeply unifying human trait. Knowledge only holds power when it's understood and applied to your own reality.
Which brings us right back to that elaborate house we built at the beginning of the deep dive. That beautiful, structurally sound house you spent 4 decades constructing, only to realize you didn't want to live inside it anymore.
Yeah.
If the first half of your life is entirely dedicated to building a social mask, and the second half is dedicated to dismantling it to find your true self, what does that mean for your past? Think about your cherished memories, the impressive job titles, the social conquests, and the external achievements of your youth. Are those triumphs truly yours? Or do they belong exclusively to the mask you used to wear? Let that guide your reflections as you navigate your own afternoon of life.